The government's announced a support package for free-to-air television and for regional media. Earlier, I caught up with the Communications Minister, Paul Fletcher. Communications Minister Paul Fletcher, thanks very much for your time. You've said today that regulated free-to-air broadcasters are competing with unregulated digital platforms and video streaming services. It's been evident for some time, and the COVID-19 crisis has made it even more obvious that this is not sustainable. The question is, will there be a comparable package of support for subscription TV like Foxtel, given that arguably subscription TV is more exposed to streaming services like Netflix and Stan?
Well, the underlying issue, as you rightly point out, Kieran, is that we have a set of regulations that apply to existing media businesses, including free-to-air television and also subscription television such as Foxtel. And then we have another set of players competing for the same audience, the same eyeballs, the same advertising revenue, namely the subscription video on demand services and other businesses operating over internet platforms which face very little regulation. So the ACCC recommended to the government in its digital platforms inquiry that we need to harmonise media regulation, and we said that what we were going to do as a consequence of that was start off by issuing an options paper that's been issued today, looking at a range of options that have been suggested by the two regulators, ACMA, Australian Communications and Media Authority, and Screen Australia, as to what a future set of rules for Australian content should be that was competitively neutral. It's important that we have Australian stories on our screens. It's important economically, it's important culturally, but at the moment we've got a set of arrangements where much of the cost of that is borne by existing television businesses, whereas newer entrants who are growing very rapidly don't contribute towards that. Now, in terms of pay TV in particular, or subscription TV, Foxtel, we've announced short-term relief from the so-called sub-quotas, Australian drama requirements, and that relief will apply to Foxtel for a 12-month period. And we've said we'll make a judgment late in calendar 2020 whether that relief needs to be rolled over into 2021. That'll depend upon how we're responding to COVID-19, whether we're still facing the social distancing issues, which at the moment are essentially meaning that most drama simply can't be produced.
This package for free-to-air television on spectrum tax rebates alone is worth more than $40 million. Will there be similar support for pay TV?
Well, what we've sought to do is provide support based upon the cost structures that existing media businesses face. So free-to-air television and radio broadcasters pay a spectrum tax each year for the use of the radio frequency spectrum. We're giving relief for a 12-month period to those businesses to assist them to be sustainable through this period. Similarly, we're committing $50 million to a public interest news gathering program which focuses on regional newspapers and on regional broadcasters. Again, recognising that the continuity of media coverage, news coverage of journalism in regional Australia is enormously important, and those businesses are under huge pressure in terms of their advertising revenues. So we've crafted a set of measures that run across the media sector. Their impact is different for different businesses. Each business has its own characteristics. As I say, there is relief on the drama spend requirement for Foxtel, so it is participating in the range of measures that are contained in this package.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only measure though, isn't it? The suspension of quotas in 2020. Beyond that, there is nothing that you've announced for subscription television.
Well, that is a significant measure for subscription television. But as I say, what we've sought to do is provide a set of measures across the media sector, providing relief to a range of different parties. What we know is that most advertising-funded Australian media businesses are under significant pressure, not just because of structural issues, which have been around for some years, but also the immediate impact of COVID-19, which is generating a sharp downturn in advertising revenues. And so as a consequence, we've got a package of measures. They apply differently to different businesses, but the combined effect will be to sustain Australian media businesses, to provide assistance during this period, at the same time as we continue with our long-term regulatory reform process, issuing this options paper developed by Screen Australia and Australian Communications and Media Authority, looking at what the long-term arrangements should be for how we support Australian stories on our screens, and looking at whether there's an over-reliance on one sector at the moment, namely free-to-air television and subscription TV, and newer businesses, which have grown very rapidly over the last few years, the SVOD services, at the moment not contributing. Now, interestingly, the options paper highlights that in Germany and in France there are requirements on SVOD services, the Netflixes, the Disney Pluses. In Canada, a major report has just recommended that there ought to be such requirements introduced in Canada. This options paper is allowing us to kick off a consultation process in Australia looking at this set of issues as they face the Australian media landscape.
Is it now time to scrap the anti-siphoning laws in relation to sport? Because there's so much pressure, not just on broadcasters right now, but on the sporting codes. Aren't the anti-siphoning laws, which prevent a level playing field, really, in terms of broadcasters, aren't those laws out of date now?
Well, the purpose of the anti-siphoning laws is to ensure that certain critical, iconic sporting events are available to Australians on free-to-air television. That was the judgment the Australian Parliament took going back to around 1994, when subscription television, pay television, first entered the Australian market. That's been the public policy balance that's been struck since then. Certainly throughout that time, Foxtel has sought to make the case that that balance should be varied. But that has been broadly the balance that's been maintained. There were some changes made in 2017 to remove some items from the list. It's not the government's current thinking that there's a case for a change to that particular balance. The reasons that made sense to have an anti-siphoning regime in 1994 continue to be important today. The availability of iconic national sporting events on free-to-air television.
But Channel 9, for example, last week expressed concern about its costs as broadcaster of the NRL. Isn't it time to get rid of some of these investment barriers that we see in this industry?
Well, there's obviously a pretty vigorous commercial engagement going on between Nine Entertainment Limited, and NRL. And these are things that occur in the course of running a television business, running a sporting business. There's certainly been plenty of commentary around as to the impact of COVID-19 on sport and on sports rights. But these are really matters for the commercial judgment of the management teams of television businesses, both subscription and free-to-air, and those charged with managing sporting codes.
Just to wrap up on this issue before I ask you about another matter, and obviously it's very clear, I mean, this news service is on Foxtel. I have a vested interest in working for this news organisation, but I just want to get a sense, does the government recognise the challenges that face subscription TV in the face of this crisis, like so many other businesses and news and media businesses? And this is a service that is watched and supported by 30% of the viewing population in this country.
Kieran, it is very clear that the unprecedented circumstances of COVID-19 are impacting businesses in extraordinary ways. And the media sector has been hit hard. Some of the other parts of my portfolio have also been hit very hard. The arts sector, for example, where audiences no longer exist. Productions have ceased. So across the economy and certainly across the media sector, many businesses have been hit very hard. And I'm certainly aware, the government certainly recognises the significant impact being felt by Foxtel as well as other media businesses with the loss of key content like sports content, with pressure on advertising revenue. So these are pressures that are affecting different businesses in different ways, but there's no doubt COVID-19 is causing big changes. In the package I've announced today, there is a relief for Foxtel from its drama requirements, and that responds to a specific request that was put to me by Foxtel management. This package seeks to respond to the needs of media businesses across the spectrum with a view to them maximising their chances of being sustainable, getting through this very difficult period of COVID-19, coming out on the other side.
Now, finally, the High Court has unanimously ruled that the Federal Police warrant used in the raid of the News Corp journalist Annika Smethurst was invalid. Is it time for greater protection for journalists and whistleblowers in this country?
Well, the point I'd make, Kieran, is that one of the protections is that the issue of a search warrant must comply with statutory requirements, and the Australian Federal Police is required to meet those statutory requirements when they execute a search warrant. In this case, the High Court has held, I understand from media reports, I've not read the judgment, but I understand from media reports that the High Court has held that the search warrant was not validly executed. Now, the key point is that the operation of the Federal Police needs to comply with the law, and if they don't comply with the law, their actions can be challenged in a court, as happened here, and their actions can be overturned, as happened here. That is an important protection for all, including journalists, who might have a search warrant executed against them.
And is there room in your mind as the Communications Minister, would you like to see greater legislative protection?
Well, my point, Kieran, is that it was a legislative requirement in relation to search warrants that I understand the High Court has determined was not met. In other words, there are existing legislative protections. Now, certainly, our government has engaged with media organisations in relation to the legal framework under which journalists operate. We've had a number of engagements last year. The Attorney-General and I have met with senior executives on a number of occasions. The Prime Minister has met with senior executives of media organisations. And, of course, there's an ongoing review being conducted by the Parliamentary Joint Committee into Intelligence and Security, PJCIS. The government certainly understands that journalists and the media sector have concerns on these issues and are putting matters to government. We've got a process in place to engage with those. But I do make the point, today's High Court judgment reminds us all that in executing search warrants, the Australian Federal Police must comply with the rule of law. If they don't, the warrant can be challenged, as it was here successfully, and that is an important feature of our liberal democracy.
Minister Fletcher, I appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thanks, Kieran.
The Communications Minister there speaking to me earlier in the day. I've just got a statement now from the Foxtel CEO, Patrick Delaney, in response to that initial media relief package as outlined by Paul Fletcher. Patrick Delaney says it's extremely disappointing so little attention has been given to subscription television in the relief package that has been announced today, despite it serving almost a third of Australian homes. We are the most disrupted part of the TV industry, a trend that is amplified with the impact of COVID-19, and the lack of recognition in the package highlights a fundamental misunderstanding of industry dynamics within the government. Subscription TV remains the most heavily regulated business in Australia, working under a regime that was designed prior to digital disruption. Current regulation is effectively a discriminatory tax on Foxtel, which impacts our ability to compete on a level playing field with free-to-air television. This disadvantage has been compounded by the emergence of aggressive international players that are vertically integrated, like, as we mentioned in that interview with the Minister, Netflix, and this players that are integrated from content creation through to exclusive distribution with global scale and unlimited funding, which has created a toxic competitive environment, threatening Australian jobs and future investment in local content, including sport.